Alpha King Lucen Harrow seized Frostmere Mill while 32 families waited outside for flour. They stood beneath a white winter sky with empty ration sacks folded against their chests. No one shouted when the royal riders arrived. Hunger had made the village careful with its strength. Adra Bellmont remained on the mill steps as soldiers surrounded the frozen wheel. She wore her widow's charcoal wool, patched at both elbows and dusted with flour. A ring of iron keys hung from her belt. Behind her, the mill's enormous Moon Millstones waited in silence, their pale surfaces veined with silver light that had not awakened in generations. War Treasurer Merrick Dane opened the accusation beneath the royal banner. Frostmere received 400 winter grain measures, he announced. Only 211 were entered into crown distribution. The missing balance remained under the authority of Adra Bellmont. The villagers looked at her, not with hatred. That would have hurt less. They looked with the frightened uncertainty of people who had been told the woman feeding them might also be the reason they remained hungry. Adra kept her hands at her sides. Read the household deliveries. Merrick's expression remained courteous. This is not a village accounting. It became one when you accused me before the village. A soldier shifted near the steps. Merrick lowered the parchment slightly. Unofficial distributions are not lawful distributions. They were children. They were names absent from the approved ration ledger. They were hungry whether your ledger approved them or not. The silence behind Adra changed. Several women lowered their empty sacks. Merrick turned toward the mounted king. Lucen sat upon a black warhorse beneath a heavy wolf fur cloak. Dark armor covered his shoulders, and 9 silver war medals crossed his chest. Each medal marked a campaign the northern packs had been taught to remember as victory. His royal wolf moved beneath his skin like a shadow behind ice. Adra had known him before the armor. Once, years earlier, he had arrived at Frostmere Mill with dragon iron lodged beneath his ribs and snow frozen in his black hair. He had been a prince then, unnamed and hunted after a border ambush. She had hidden him above the grain loft. He had watched her divide the last loaf into 5 pieces and carry every piece downstairs. "You have eaten nothing," he had whispered when she returned. "There were 5 people hungrier than I was." He remembered. She saw it in the way his gaze moved toward the kitchen window. But memory did not make him dismount. Merrick raised a second document. The treasury found private bins beneath the eastern floor. Adra's attention sharpened. Those bins had belonged to Tavian. Her husband had built them during the first winter shortage, when royal wagons began arriving late and returning half-empty. He had said every village needed one place the crown could not count before the children were fed. 3 months later, Tavian died beneath the outer wheel. The official record called it a mill accident. Adra had never believed the shape of the wound across his back came from stone. Lucen finally spoke. Were the hidden bins declared? No. Were they included in the crown inventory? No. Did you distribute grain without treasury authorization? Adra met his eyes. Yes. A murmur passed through the soldiers. Merrick's accusation now had the sound of confession. Lucen's jaw hardened. Why? Because authorization arrived after burial. The king looked toward the villagers. He saw hollow cheeks, thin wrists, children standing too quietly beside their mothers. Then he looked back at the sealed records in Merrick's hands. Adra watched him choose. By winter emergency law, Lucen said, Frostmere Mill is seized under the crown until the missing grain is accounted for. Lucen had found hunger outside the door and still chosen the man whose numbers required a thief. A woman behind Adra began to cry without making a sound. Lucen continued. Distribution authority transfers immediately to War Treasurer Merrick Dane. There it was. Not merely stone taken, not merely machinery. He had removed Adra from the work she had kept alive and placed hunger beneath the authority of the man who had arrived carrying numbers instead of flour. Merrick climbed the steps. Your keys. Adra did not reach for them. You may take the building, she said. You will not take my measure. The royal seal now determines measure. The royal seal has never lifted a starving child. Merrick extended his hand. Lucen dismounted. For one dangerous moment, Adra thought he might remember the wounded prince in the loft. Instead, he stopped before her. Give him the keys. She looked at the silver medals across his chest. The last time you stood inside this mill, you knew who received the final bread. His expression changed, but only slightly. This is not that winter. No, that winter you were hungry enough to notice. Lucen's wolf pressed hard beneath his eyes. He reached for the keys himself. Adra removed them before he could touch her and placed them on the frozen step between them. "You have taken the mill publicly," she said. "Then account for it publicly." Merrick collected the keys. He ordered the royal grain wagons opened. Soldiers carried the first sacks inside, while villagers watched from the yard. Merrick intended to prove the mill would operate more efficiently without its widow. Adra followed them into the grinding hall. The wheel remained still. No water moved beneath the frozen channel. Yet as Lucen crossed the threshold, a low stone vibration passed through the floor. One of his war medals trembled. Merrick stopped. The medal marked the siege of Red Hollow, where the crown had celebrated for 7 nights while Frostmere received half its promised winter allotment. Its silver ribbon pulled tight against Lucen's armor. Then the medal tore free. It flew across the hall before any soldier could catch it and vanished between the Moon Millstones. The stones began turning without water. They did not judge theft. They remembered grain weight, ration debt, and the winter measure taken from one hunger to feed another. Silver light filled their ancient grooves. Metal screamed once inside the grinding chamber. Something small fell into the flour tray. Adra reached it first. It was not a broken metal. It was a luminous ration token stamped with the Frostmere village seal. Beneath the seal was the winter date Adra Bellmont had died. The king stared at the token in her palm. The Moon Millstones had taken one piece of his glory and returned it as food that had never reached her people. The metal had not broken inside the millstones. It had been measured. The ration token lay in Adra's palm, small enough to disappear beneath 2 fingers and bright enough to turn every face in the grinding hall pale. The Frostmere seal showed a crescent cut through by a mill wheel. Below it, the winter date remained unmistakable. The day Adra Bellmont died, Merrick recovered first. A ration token is not proof of grain. Adra closed her fingers around it. No, it is proof that grain entered this mill under Frostmere measure. Tokens were used throughout the northern campaigns as emergency substitutes. Not these. She held it toward Lucen. Frostmere tokens were stamped only after grain crossed the receiving scale. Tavian cut the village seal himself. The millstone flour record and the token weight were entered together. Lucen looked at Merrick. "Is that correct?" Merrick's expression barely changed. "Local practice has no authority over crown accounting. That was not my question." A slow tension entered the hall. Outside, the 32 families still waited in the cold. They could not see the token from the yard, but they could see the king standing motionless before the flour tray and the war treasurer avoiding a simple answer. Adra moved to the eastern wall. A row of wooden measure boards hung above the old scales. Each board carried shallow cuts marking grain weight, flour yield, and household distribution. Merrick stepped into her path. "The mill is under royal seizure. You wanted an accounting. I want the crown inventory protected." Adra looked at Lucen. "Those are not the same thing." Lucen's wolf shifted behind his eyes. "Let her reach the records." Merrick moved aside. Not willingly. Adra removed the board, marked Red Hollow Winter from the wall. Tavian's handwriting crossed its surface in narrow black lines. 400 measures promised. 211 received. 189 absent. The number matched Merrick's accusation. But beneath it, Tavian had added another line. Emergency tokens prepared against delayed royal wagons. Adra set the glowing token into the carved weight groove at the board's edge. It fit exactly. The silver light traveled through the wood and stopped beneath the missing amount. 1 token, 1 measure, 1 account path. Nothing more. The Moon Millstones did not produce mercy. They produced measure. Merrick studied the board. "This proves only that your husband expected a shortage. It proves the token was issued for grain Frostmere was supposed to receive. Supposed to receive is not received." Adra turned the board over. On the back, Tavian had cut the royal wagon marks. 12 wagons authorized. 6 arrived full. 3 arrived below half. 3 never crossed the mill gate. Lucen stepped closer. The campaign record listed 12 deliveries. The campaign record did not weigh them, Adra said. Merrick folded his hands behind his back. Red Hollow was under siege. Grain moved according to battlefield necessity. Then why was Frostmere marked complete? Because the allotment was fulfilled through equivalent crown provision. Adra lifted the token. This was the provision? It was a temporary ration instrument. A ration instrument no family received. Merrick's voice cooled. "Widow Bellmont, you distributed outside the authorized ledger. You are hardly positioned to accuse the Treasury of irregular procedure. Adra fed children outside the ledger because the ledger had learned not to count them. The words settled harder than shouting. Lucen looked toward the open mill doors. A boy stood beside his mother with an empty sack wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak. Lucen had worn the campaign across his chest while Frostmere wore the shortage in its bones. He turned to one of his guards. "Bring the Red Hollow campaign ledger." Merrick's head moved sharply. "Majesty, campaign allotments are sealed." "Then break the seal. The ledger contains military provisioning routes. The campaign ended 6 years ago. Some routes remain sensitive." Lucen held his chaze. "Open it." The ledger arrived from the royal wagon in an iron case. Merrick carried the treasury key, but Lucen took it from him and opened the lock himself. Pages of grain tallies, horse feed, cured meat, and winter fuel filled the book. Adra did not read the totals first. She read the measure columns. Millers knew where lies hid, not in the grand sum, in the difference between what entered whole and what left ground. She found Frostmere beneath the Red Hollow Supply District. 400 winter measures assigned. 400 marked delivered. Beside the entry sat a narrow transfer symbol. Adra pointed to it. "What does that mark mean?" Merrick answered before Lucen could ask. "Temporary campaign redirection." "To where?" "Victory Reserve." Lucen turned the page. The next section listed 7 royal feasts held after the siege. White bread, honey grain, roasted winter barley, silver cup flour for noble houses. 200 measures entered the celebration stores from rural emergency allotments. Frostmere accounted for 189 of them. The missing grain had not vanished. It had been renamed. Merrick had not lost grain. He had renamed it War Necessity. The soldiers survived because supply officers made difficult choices, he said. Red Hollow held. The northern packs remained secure. The siege had ended before the feasts, Adra said. Victory must be stabilized politically. With bread taken from children? With resources distributed where the crown required loyalty. Lucen looked down at the empty place on his armor where the medal had hung. A war medal is only silver until the hungry learn what was melted into it. Merrick's composure thinned. The medal was struck from campaign silver, not grain. Adra placed the token beside the ledger. Silver bought the grain. Grain became feast stores. The excess silver returned as metals. The account remained the same even when its shape changed. The mill had not cleared Adra. It had opened the first account Lucen had never read. He turned back to the Frostmere entry. Why build hidden bins if Tavian knew the grain was being redirected? Because royal wagons had begun returning half-empty before Red Hollow. Adra traced the cuts on the measure board. He stored what little arrived before the treasury could call it surplus. Merrick shut the ledger with one hand. Your husband concealed crown grain. My husband protected village grain after the crown stopped protecting the village. Lucen pulled the book back toward him. A folded paper slipped from between the final campaign pages. It bore Adra Bellmont's mill seal. Adra stopped breathing. The complaint was addressed to the war treasury. It accused crown wagons of false delivery marks, missing ration weights, and grain transfers entered after the wagons had already turned away from Frostmere. At the bottom, Tavian had written the date, 3 days before his death. The complaint had reached the treasury before Tavian's body reached the mill floor. Tavian had not died before the theft was named. He had died after naming it. Lucen held the complaint beneath the grinding hall lamps while the Frostmere seal shone dark red in the wax. Merrick reached for the paper. That document belongs to the war treasury. Adra placed one hand over it before he could take it. It belonged to Tavian first. Lucen looked at the narrow cut beneath the seal. It was too clean to be damage from storage and too deliberate to be decoration. What is this mark? A receipt cut, Adra said. Treasury clerks remove one corner when a complaint is formally received. A draft would still have 4. The lower right corner was missing. Merrick's expression remained controlled. Thousands of wartime petitions entered the treasury. Receipt did not establish truth. It established that someone read enough to bury it. It established only delivery. Lucen folded the complaint once. Open the complaint register. Merrick did not move. Wartime complaints remained sealed until the final campaign audit. The campaign ended 6 years ago. Several supply disputes remain unresolved. One of the men who filed them is dead. Merrick's eyes shifted toward Adra. The death was ruled accidental. That ruling is not the question before us. It will become the question if local grief is allowed to rewrite treasury procedure. Adramet his gaze. My grief did not cut the receipt mark. Lucen ordered the register brought inside. It arrived bound in black hide, with an iron clasp and 3 narrow keys. Merrick carried one. The royal quartermaster carried another. The third had remained sealed beneath the crown supply chest. Lucen broke the wax himself. He opened the register to the winter of Tavian's death. Complaints filled the pages in cramped rows. Delayed horse feed, spoiled campaign meat, missing healer stores, unauthorized wagon seizures. Most had been marked resolved, transferred, or unverified. Adra found Tavian's entry by the Frostmere Crescent. Complaint received. False delivery measures alleged. Civilian ration diversion alleged. Hidden emergency stores declared for village survival. Status: unverified local grievance. Merrick tapped the final line. There. No supporting crown witness, no verified wagon officer, no reason to disrupt military supply command. Tavian supplied measure boards, Adra said. Local boards. He supplied wagon cuts, made by a miller accusing the treasury. He supplied household names, names absent from the authorized ration ledger. Adra looked at Lucen. The same absence used to call my distributions unlawful. Lucen read the next notation. Direct royal audience requested. His thumb stopped over the line. Below it, another hand had written, not forwarded. Operational burden. Refer to District Treasury Review. Lucen's voice lowered. Who decided not to forward it? Merrick studied the clerk's initials. A wartime review officer. Under whose authority? The War Treasury. Yours. Mine among many others. A treasury cannot deliver every local accusation directly to the crown. This one named false military deliveries. So did dozens of fraudulent claims from villages seeking doubled allotments. Adra closed her eyes for one breath. Tavian had known they would call him greedy. That was why he had recorded grain by weight, not trust. That was why he had hidden enough for children before sending the complaint. He had not expected the system to believe his character. He had expected it to answer his measure. Lucen turned the page. No district review followed. The entry simply ended. Merrick had not lost the complaint beneath campaign disorder. His office had named it too small to matter. Lucen had come to seize a thief's mill and found the first warning his own treasury had ignored. Bring the death record, he ordered. Merrick's restraint tightened. Majesty, a mill accident record belongs to village jurisdiction. The War Treasury classified the complaint. The same office reviewed his death. The Treasury reviewed any loss affecting Crown Grain property. Then bring it. The record was stored in the mill's old lockbox because Tavian had died while the building remained under Crown Grain contract. Adra had read it only once. At the time, the words had been covered by mourning so thick she could barely hold them in memory. Now she laid the paper beside Tavian's complaint. The official account claimed the outer wheel had fractured during a night inspection. Tavian had fallen beneath the lower brace. The turning spokes had struck his back before the wheel stopped. Merrick pointed to the ruling, witnessed by 2 treasury guards. Where are their statements? Lucen asked. Attached in the district archive. They are not listed here. Administrative omission. Adra ignored them both. She read the wound description. 1 deep diagonal injury from the right shoulder to the lower left ribs. No crushing damage to either arm. No fracture of the spine. No grain dust inside the wound. The accident record called the wheel broken, she said. Adra knew which marks a wheel could leave, and which it could not. Lucen looked toward the outer mechanism. Show me. They crossed the rear passage to the frozen wheel chamber. Snow had entered through gaps in the timber wall. The great wheel stood locked above the dark water channel, its spokes broad as a man's chest. Adra placed her palm against the lower brace. If Tavian fell here, the first spoke would have caught his arms. She moved to the next point. The second would have crushed his ribs against the frame. She touched the iron edge, and this would have left grain grease and rust inside the wound. The record described none of those things. Lucen studied the distance between the spokes. What could leave 1 diagonal injury? A hooked grain spear. Merrick answered too quickly. Those were carried by every winter warehouse guard. Adra turned. Not by millers. Silence entered the wheel chamber. Lucen returned to the accident record and examined the seals. The village physician had signed after midnight. The mill steward had signed at dawn. But the legal ruling appeared above both statements. Accidental death confirmed. Crown grain liability closed. The War Treasury seal sat beneath it. Lucen checked the time notation twice. The ruling had been entered before the physician examined Tavian, before Adra was called from the village chapel, before the body was carried through Frostmere Mill's doors. It bore the authorization of Merrick Dane's deputy. The Treasury had ruled Tavian's death an accident before the mill had received its dead miller. The seal belonged to Merrick's deputy, but the authority behind it wore Merrick's chain. The accident record had named the wheel. The wound had named a weapon. Lucen carried both records back into the grinding hall and laid them beside Tavian's complaint. Name the deputy. Merrick removed his gloves one finger at a time. Deputy Treasurer Halvin Marr signed district liability closures during the Red Hollow campaign. Where is he? Dead. Adra watched Merrick's face. No hesitation. No grief. Only an answer prepared to end the path before anyone walked it. When? Lucen asked. 3 winters ago. Cause? Long favor. Where are his office records? Transferred after his death. Some were destroyed under retention law. Lucen looked toward the Treasury seal on Tavian's accident ruling. A dead deputy is still not an explanation. He followed wartime procedure, Merrick said. A grain contractor died on Crown property. Liability was closed so the mill could continue operating. Before the body arrived, time markings from district offices are often entered ahead of final delivery. Adra touched the record. An accident record written before the body arrives is not a finding. It is an instruction. Merrick turned toward her. You are reading intent into clerical sequence. My husband's complaint was received before his death. His death was classified before examination. Sequence is the only part your office failed to bury. Lucen opened the accident record again. Where are the Treasury Guard statements? In the district archive. They are not attached. Attachments were stored separately. Bring them. Merrick's jaw shifted. The archive is 6 hours south. Lucen motioned to the royal quartermaster. Search the campaign chest. The quartermaster hesitated. Majesty, district statements would not normally travel with central records. Neither would a miller's complaint. Yet it was hidden inside my campaign ledger. The chest was opened on the flour table. Inside lay guard rosters, weapon inventories, wagon assignments, and sealed reports from winter supply stations. The quartermaster searched each bundle while Adra stood beside Tavian's measure board. She did not look at the villagers beyond the doors. They had waited years for flour. They could wait a little longer for the truth to stop being renamed. The quartermaster found the Frostmere guard roster. 2 treasury guards had been assigned to the mill on the night Tavian died. Their witness statements were listed by number. The pages themselves were gone. Merrick examined the index. Archive transfer loss. Both? Lucen asked. Records disappear during war. Only the statements from the men standing beside a dead complainant? Merrick metisgaze. Suspicion does not restore missing paper. Adra leaned over the roster. Beside each guard's name was a weapon mark. The first carried a short winter blade. The second carried a hooked grain spear. She placed one finger beneath the symbol. This one. Merrick glanced at it. A warehouse weapon. A weapon made to pull grain sacks from high stacks without cutting them, and to break ice from wagon braces, and to leave one deep diagonal wound if the hook entered near the shoulder and was pulled downward. The quartermaster opened the weapon inventory. Each spear had a number burned into the shaft and a separate entry for repairs. The hooked spear assigned to Frostmere appeared halfway down the page. Issued before sunset. Returned after dawn. Spearhead replaced. Reason. Winter fracture. Merrick spoke before Lucen could ask. Iron breaks in frozen work. Adra took the accident record and set it beside the inventory. The wound description gave the depth of entry and the width of the torn flesh. She measured the line with Tavian's old flour gauge, a narrow wooden tool used to check the gap between grinding stones. Lucen watched her place the gauge across the recorded width. What are you doing? Comparing measure. With a wound written on paper? With a wound described by a physician who had no reason to know which weapon made it. She adjusted the gauge. The hook on a winter grain spear is cut to this width so it can hold rope without slicing through it. Merrick folded his arms. You have not seen the spearhead. No, your office replaced it, because it fractured. A fractured hook leaves an uneven wound. She tapped the physician's wording. This wound was clean at entry and wider at release. The hook remained whole long enough to be pulled free. Lucen looked at the weapon inventory. The replacement head was entered after the death. After dawn, Merrick corrected. Adra turned toward him. Tavian died before midnight. The guard could have damaged the weapon later. Doing what? Winter duty. At a mill sealed after a death? Merrick's expression hardened. You are asking a widow's knowledge of machinery to overrule trained treasury officers. The wheel had been blamed because stone could not defend itself. No one answered. Lucen took the flour gauge from the table and held it against the inventory sketch of the hooked spear. The widths matched. Not perfectly enough to name a killer, but precisely enough to destroy the comfort of accident. Find the replacement order, he said. The quartermaster searched the repair bundle. Merrick moved closer. Majesty, weapon replacements were routine. A signed order proves maintenance, not murder. Then you should have no reason to prevent me from reading it. I am preventing procedure from being turned into theater. Adra looked at the 32 empty sacks beyond the door. Your procedure has always required an audience only after the hungry are accused. The replacement order was folded beneath 3 wagon repair slips. 1 hooked grain spearhead. Immediate replacement authorized. Old head to be melted without inspection due to winter fracture. Lucen read the time. The order had been entered before dawn. Before the village physician completed his examination. Before the missing guard statements were transferred. Before Tavian's death was formally recorded at Frostmere. At the bottom, no deputy seal appeared. The authorization bore the personal chain mark of War Treasurer Merrick Dane. Merrick had ordered the weapon repaired before the kingdom had finished calling Tavian's death an accident. Merrick's chain had touched the weapon before Tavian's body was cold. That did not prove he had ordered the killing. It proved he had known enough to erase the spearhead before anyone could examine it. Merrick remained beside the flour table, his face composed beneath the grinding lamps. I authorized a replacement, he said. I did not inspect every broken tool carried by winter guards. Lucen held up the repair order. You marked the old head for immediate melting. Damaged treasury iron was routinely reclaimed. Without inspection? During wartime, yes. Before the physician completed the death record? Merrick's gaze shifted toward Adra. Widow Bellmont has encouraged you to connect ordinary procedures until they resemble intention. Adra looked at the empty place on Lucen's armor, where the red hollow metal had hung. Ordinary procedure took grain from Frostmere, buried Tavian's complaint, ruled his death before examination, and melted the weapon that matched his wound. She placed both hands on the flour table. At what point does repetition stop being coincidence? Lucen turned to the quartermaster. Name the guards assigned here that night. The roster listed 2 men. One had died during a mountain supply, crossing 4 winters earlier. The other had been transferred into the Central Treasury Escort and retired with a campaign pension. Neither statement remained in the district archive. Merrick folded his gloves. Dead witnesses and missing pages do not create proof. No, Adra said. They leave the mill. She took the iron lamp from the wall and walked toward the eastern floor. Merrick stepped after her. The hidden bins have already been recorded as unlawful storage. Recorded by the same office that called Tavian's wound a wheel mark. Lucen followed. Adra stopped beside 3 broad planks beneath the old receiving scale. Their edges were dark with flour, dust, and age. She knelt and ran 2 fingers along the nearest seam. A shallow black groove crossed the wood. Lucen crouched opposite her. What made that? A hook pulled sideways under weight. A grain spear? The shaft was too long to turn properly in this room. Whoever used it dragged from the doorway. She pointed toward the eastern loading entrance. 3 more grooves marked the floor between the door and the hidden bins. They did not lead toward the outer wheel. They led directly to Tavian's emergency stores. Merrick looked down at them. Guards would have used hooks to recover concealed crown grain. Adra lifted her eyes. Then they were here for the bins. They were assigned to the mill. The accident ruling said they found Tavian beneath the wheel during an inspection. That does not prevent an earlier inventory search. Then where is that search in their statements? Merrick did not answer. Adra removed the keys Merrick had taken from her and left on the measure desk. She chose the narrowest one. He reached toward her wrist. The mill remains under seizure. She pulled her hand away before he touched her. You may take the building. You will not take my measure. Lucen looked at Merrick. Let her open it. Adra unlocked the receiving scale and lifted the iron plate beneath it. A cold breath of grain dust rose from the darkness. She descended first. Lucen moved toward the ladder as if to follow beside her. The lower rung is split, she said. Walk where I place my feet. He obeyed. Below the floor, 3 stone bins formed a narrow crescent around the mill foundation. Each one stood empty now. Tavian had built them low enough to remain cool and deep enough to protect grain from freezing damp. Adra set the lamp near the first bin. Measure cuts covered the inner wall. Not crown totals. Household portions. A widow with 2 children. An injured woodcutter. 3 orphaned brothers. An elderly couple whose ration names had been removed after they could no longer work the winter roads. Merrick descended behind them. These marks confirm unauthorized distribution. They confirm who remained alive. You concealed grain from royal recovery. We concealed it from men who arrived after midnight. Lucen turned. After midnight? Adra pointed to the stone lip around the second bin. A treasury recovery seal had been pressed into old wax there. The seal was 6 years old, cracked with cold but still readable. Undeclared reserve located. Immediate removal authorized. No village witnesses required. Merrick studied it without bending closer. Emergency recovery orders often excluded civilians to prevent disorder. The civilians were the owners of the grain, Adra said. The grain had entered a crown-contracted mill. It had also entered Tavian's scale. Every measure belonged to a household before your guards found the floor. Lucen traced the seal without touching it. Who issued the recovery order? The full order is not here, Merrick said. Adra lifted the lamp. A narrow strip of parchment remained trapped behind the wax, folded into the stone seam. Tavian must have pushed it there before the guards removed the rest. Only 3 lines survived. Recover all undeclared winter reserve before royal inspection. Resistance constitutes interference with campaign supply. Force authorized under Treasury protection. The final line had been torn through the signature, but part of the chain mark remained. The same linked circle Merrick wore around his office seal. Lucen's wolf moved visibly beneath his eyes. Merrick's voice stayed even. A partial mark cannot establish which Treasury officer signed it. No, Adra said. But the time can. She turned the parchment toward the lamp. The order had been entered 1 hour before Tavian's death. Lucen looked from the recovery seal to the hook grooves leading from the eastern door. Tavian had not gone to inspect a broken wheel. He had come below the mill because armed treasury guards were removing the grain he had hidden for Frostmere's families. Adra crossed to the final bin. On its outer wall, beneath a later layer of whitewash, one long scrape descended from shoulder height toward the floor. The width matched the flour gauge. The path matched the physician's description. A hooked grain spear could make that mark. A mill wheel could not. Lucen stared at the evidence Merrick's office had left inside the stone. War accounting had stolen Frostmere's grain. Treasury procedure had buried the man who measured it. The wheel had not killed Tavian. It had been chosen afterward because stone could not defend itself. The hidden bins had preserved what the Treasury had tried to remove. Not a confession, but a route. Hook marks led from the eastern door to the household grain. A recovery order authorized force. A spear-shaped scrape marked the wall where Tavian had fallen. Lucen climbed from beneath the mill with Tavian's torn order in one hand. Merrick followed more slowly. Partial seals and old scratches do not establish murder, he said. Adra emerged last and closed the floor plate behind her. They establish that your guards entered for grain before the wheel was blamed. They establish an authorized recovery, then produce the guards who performed it. Merrick looked toward the roster on the flour table. One is dead. The other retired, Lucen said. Where? Royal pension records are protected. Lucen's voice hardened. Not from the crown. Merrick gave the name only after the king ordered the pension register opened. Sergeant Oren Thale, former winter warehouse guard. Retired to a supply lodge 2 hours north of Frostmere. Lucen sent 4 riders. Merrick watched them leave through the open doors. Outside, the waiting families shifted closer when royal grain sacks were carried toward the receiving scale. Resume milling, Merrick ordered. Adra crossed the hall before the soldiers reached the hopper. She pulled the iron measure pin from beneath the feed gate. The wooden chute locked. Nothing could enter the Moon Millstones. Medic turned. You are obstructing a royal seizure. I am stopping unmeasured grain. The sacks carry crown seals. So did the wagons marked full when they arrived half empty. The families outside require flour. Yes. Adra placed the measure pin inside her apron. That is why no grain enters this mill behind closed records again. Lucen looked through the doorway. 32 households still waited beneath the falling snow. You would keep them hungry while we investigate? I would keep your treasury from feeding them only on paper. She pointed toward the receiving scale. 3 village witnesses at every weighing. Household names entered before flour leaves. Wagon totals posted on the outer door. No sealed surplus removed after dark. Merrick's expression sharpened. Civilian oversight of royal grain would invite disorder. Private oversight created the disorder. The crown cannot surrender supply authority to frighten villagers. Adra met Lucen's eyes. Then take the mill and explain why its flour still requires my hands. The challenge was quiet. That made it harder to dismiss. Lucen had seized the building, the wheel, the grain contracts, and the keys. He had not seized the knowledge that told whole sacks from damp weight, honest flour from ash mixture, or household need from treasury convenience. Choose the witnesses, he said. Merrick stepped toward him. Majesty, open the scales. The mill did not return to Adra. Merrick's seizure seal remained above the door, but his office no longer controlled the measure alone. Adra selected an elderly shepherd, a mother who kept the village burial list, and a former wagon driver with 2 frost-damaged fingers. Each stood beside the scale, while the royal sacks were opened publicly. The first sack matched its mark. The second lacked nearly a quarter measure. The third contained stones beneath the grain. No one cheered. The villagers watched with the exhausted attention of people learning that suspicion had not been foolish enough. Lucen stood near the flour table as Adra entered every discrepancy. You could have sent these conditions to the crown years ago, he said. She did not stop writing. Tavian did. I mean you. Adra looked up. My husband asked for a direct audience. Your treasury decided his hunger was an operational burden. I did not see the request. No. Her voice remained level. You saw medals. The words reached the place apology might have entered. Lucen did not use it. He removed the remaining red hollow decorations from his cloak and placed them face down on the table. Adra noticed. She did not thank him. Near dusk, the northern riders returned with Sergeant Oren Thale. He was a broad, gray-bearded man whose left leg dragged behind him. A treasury pension clasp held his winter coat closed. He stopped when he saw Adra. Not because he failed to recognize her, because he did. Merrick positioned himself between the retired guard and the table. This man's pension depends upon protected military service. He is not required to answer village accusations. Lucen moved Merrick aside. He will answer the crown. Oren looked at the accident record, the guard roster, and the replacement order. His face seemed to age around them. We were sent for undeclared grain, he said. Who sent you? Lucen asked. The recovery order came through Deputy Treasurer Marr. Who carried the hooked spear? Oren swallowed. My partner. Did Tavian attack him? No. Merrick's voice cut across the hall. Consider carefully what 6 years may have done to your memory. Oren stared at the war treasurer's chain. We found Bellmont below the scale. He stood between us and the bins. He said every measure had a household name. Adra's fingers tightened around Tavian's measure board. What happened? My partner hooked the first grain sack. Bellmont pulled it back. The spear turned. Turned? Lucen asked. Oren's gaze dropped. It entered his shoulder. Accidentally, I cannot say what the other man intended. Then say what followed. Oren looked toward the outer wheel chamber. Tavian was alive. He asked for Adra and the physician. Adra did not move. We were ordered to load the grain first, Oren continued. Then Deputy Marr told us the death would be recorded beneath the wheel. Merrick's control finally showed a fracture. My deputy could not alter a village death without supporting authority. Oren reached beneath his coat. He removed a narrow black dispatch strip, folded until the edges had softened. I kept this because the first statement I signed disappeared. Lucen opened it. The order contained no description of murder, no instruction to strike Tavian. Only one sentence issued under the war treasurer's private chain. Complete recovery before witnesses gather. If the miller interferes, close crown liability before dawn. The dispatch had been sent from Merrick's office 1 hour before the guards entered Frostmere Mill. Oren's dispatch did not order Tavian's death. It ordered the treasury to survive it. Merrick stood beneath the royal banner, while Lucen read the black strip a second time. Close crown liability is an accounting instruction, the war treasurer said. It does not authorize violence. It was issued before your guards entered the mill, Lucen replied, because undeclared grain creates predictable resistance. Adra looked at him across Tavian's measure board. You predicted the resistance, sent armed men, removed the grain, replaced the weapon, and closed the death before the physician arrived. None of that proves I ordered a guard to strike your husband. No, she said. It proves you built a procedure in which his death protected the theft better than his survival could expose it. Oren lowered his head. Merrick turned toward him. You stole a treasury dispatch and concealed it for 6 years. I kept the only statement your office did not take. A frightened guard's memory is not law. My husband's body was not law either, Adra said. You still wrote the ruling before seeing it. Lucen folded the dispatch and placed it beside Merrick's replacement order. Your private chain appears on both. My chain authorized thousands of urgent actions during Red Hollow. Then open the private chain register. For the first time, Merrick did not answer immediately. The register was not among the campaign chests. It remained in the capital treasury, where every order issued under Merrick's personal authority was copied before dispatch. Lucen called for a royal flame message. Merrick stepped between him and the signal brazier. If you suspend my chain while winter allotments are active, every northern release-bearing treasury authorization becomes contestable. Lucen's eyes narrowed. How many? Nearly all of them. Outside, the families waited for flour that had finally begun passing through public measure. Merrick continued quietly. You may investigate me, Majesty, but if you strip my authority tonight, warehouse masters will hold their doors until a lawful replacement is named. Villages will lose days they do not have. Adra understood the shape of the defense. Merrick had arranged the ration system so accountability itself looked like famine. Lucen looked toward the open mill doors. What would happen here? The grain under seizure could not be distributed without treasury release. Adra removed the measure pin from her apron and set it on the table. Then Frostmere will distribute under household ownership. Merrick almost smiled. That is unlawful. So was marking empty wagons delivered. You would make one village's desperation greater than crown order? I would make every sack answer to the family named before it. Lucen studied her. You can keep the mill running without his release? I can keep it honest. Running depends on whether the crown sends grain instead of seals. Merrick's voice hardened. If you permit this, every mill will claim local necessity and refuse central levy. Every mill should refuse a levy that arrives after its children have been erased from the ration book. The 3 village witnesses remained beside the scale. None looked triumphant. They looked ready to work. Lucen took the treasury seizure seal from above the door. He did not return the mill. He turned the seal face down. Frostmere distribution continues under public measure until the private chain register is opened. Merrick's wolf pressed briefly behind his eyes. You are replacing royal law with a widow's conditions. No, Lucen said. I am preventing your authority from being the only door between grain and hunger. Near nightfall, the first flour was divided. Adra entered every household name before a sack left the table. She gave Oren a place near the stove because his damaged leg had begun to shake. Lucen remained standing. There was one bowl of winter stew beside Adra's chair and a heel of dark bread on the board. Years earlier, she had given the final bread to everyone except herself. He had remembered that mercy while taking her keys. He moved toward the table. Adra covered the bread with a cloth. The public measure is for Frostmere households. I am not asking for royal portion. No, you are asking to sit where you placed Merrick above me. Lucen stopped. Around them, spoons moved quietly through bowls. He could command the chair. He did not. He returned to the flour table and ate nothing. The royal flame message reached the capital after midnight. The answer arrived before dawn in a sealed packet carried by a snow-winged courier hawk. The private chain register could not be released, the treasury clerk wrote, because it had been removed for winter continuity review. Lucen read the phrase twice. Removed by whom? The courier produced a second page. War Treasurer Merrick Dane. Adra examined the transfer date. It was not recent. Merrick had removed his private register from the capital 3 days before coming to seize Frostmere Mill. A final attachment listed the documents transferred with it. Winter liability closures. Emergency grain recoveries. Suspected hoarding mills. 17 mill names followed. Each had been marked for royal seizure, before its current grain was weighed. Frostmere was not the only village Merrick had prepared to call guilty. It was the first mill whose stones had returned the accusation to measure. The list of 17 mills was not a warning register. It was an acquisition plan. Adra spread the pages across the flour table while dawn gathered gray beyond Frostmere's windows. Each mill name carried 3 marks beside it. Suspected hoarding, emergency seizure authorized, replacement steward prepared. The replacement stewards were not villagers. They were war suppliers, treasury allies, and retired officers from the Red Hollow campaign. Lucen read the names in silence. Merrick stood near the extinguished signal brazier. "You are misreading administrative preparation." Adra pointed to the transfer column. "Each mill already has a new keeper, in case local obstruction threatens winter distribution. Before the grain is weighed, patterns of misconduct are rarely isolated." "No," Adra said. "Patterns of accusation are not." She traced the route lines connecting the mills. All 17 stood along the northern grain road. Together, they controlled nearly half the winter flour entering the poorer packs. If Merrick seized them, household distribution would pass through his office before a single sack reached a village scale. Lucen looked toward the public measure beside Frostmere's door. 3 witnesses recorded each grain weight. Every household name remained visible. Nothing could be removed as surplus without the village seeing what had arrived first. Merrick's system required the opposite: closed scales, central ledgers, invisible transfers. "Why prepare replacement stewards before confirming theft?" Lucen asked. "Because delay kills during famine. So does seizure. Not when the crown manages efficiently." Adra lifted the 3rd wagon tally from that morning. Stones hidden beneath grain. A quarter measure missing. A full crown seal pressed over both. Efficiency for whom? Merrick ignored her and addressed Lucen. "If these mills refuse treasury direction, northern supply fractures. Rival packs will hold grain for their own bloodlines. Roads will close. Winter unrest will become rebellion." Lucen's wolf moved behind his eyes. Merrick had always known which fear to feed him. A divided kingdom, hungry packs turning on one another. The crown remembered rebellion more clearly than it remembered empty kitchens. Adra watched Lucen approach the same choice he had made on the mill steps. Hunger before him, Merrick's certainty beside it. This time, she did not wait quietly. "Send riders to every mill on this list." Merrick's expression sharpened. "You do not issue royal orders." "No, I issue the condition under which Frostmere continues grinding your grain." Lucen looked at her. "What condition?" "Every listed mill opens its receiving weights before seizure. 3 household witnesses. Wagon totals posted publicly. No treasury replacement takes possession until the village records are compared with the crown ledger." "That would delay 17 inspections," Merrick said. "It would delay 17 confiscations." "Majesty granting this demand tells every local keeper that crown authority may be negotiated through obstruction." Adra took the iron measure pin from her apron. "If you refuse, the gate closes." The mill wheel turned steadily behind her. Flour continued falling for the families already entered. But the next royal wagon remained unopened. Lucen understood. Adra was not threatening to starve Frostmere. She was refusing to let Frostmere's labor legitimize the seizure of other villages. "You would stop all crown grain?" he asked. "I will finish every household measure already witnessed. After that, no royal sack enters these stones until the 17 mills are weighed in daylight." Merrick's voice lowered. "You are holding winter supply against the king. I am holding the scale where everyone can see it." Lucen looked toward the bread table. The covered heel remained untouched. He had not been invited to eat. He had also not left. "Send the riders," he ordered. Merrick stepped forward. "Majesty, to all 17 mills. No seizure proceeds before public weighing. You are allowing one widow to rewrite winter law." Lucen looked at the pages bearing replacement stewards chosen before any accusation was tested. "Winter law has already been rewritten. I am learning who held the pen." The royal riders departed before sunrise. By midday, answers began returning. The first mill reported 6 missing wagons despite a complete delivery mark. The second found wet sand beneath sealed barley. The third had received ration tokens in place of grain, though no household had been allowed to redeem them. At the fourth, treasury officers had already removed the miller and appointed a Red Hollow quartermaster. No supernatural stone exposed those accounts. Millstones, wagon drivers did. Widows who remembered sack numbers did. Children who knew which doors had stopped giving bread did. Adra built a second board beside Frostmere's scale. 17 mill names. Promised grain. Received grain. Missing weight. She entered each reply as it arrived. The pattern grew visible without magic. Merrick watched his authority become arithmetic. "These reports are coordinated resistance," he said. "Against what?" Adra asked. "Central Winter Command. Against being named thieves before the wagons arrive." Lucen read the 4th mill's message. The appointed steward had already locked its household ledger and claimed all private bins as crown reserve. Recall him. Merrick did not move. Lucen repeated the order. The recall requires treasury chain authorization. Use yours. My private register is under review. By you. And until continuity is restored, my office cannot safely reverse active seizures. There it was again. Accountability made to resemble collapse. Lucen turned to the quartermaster. Send crown riders under my seal. Merrick's expression finally lost its patience. Your seal cannot release grain already placed under treasury liability. Then remove the liability. That would expose the crown to every local claim entered during wartime. Good. The single word changed the room. Merrick stared at him. Lucen continued. Open every wartime mill claim tied to the 17 seizures. You will bankrupt the victory treasury. Adra looked at the medals still fastened across the armor of Lucen's officers. Not Lucen's own. He had removed those. But silver victory still covered the room. Then perhaps victory has been carrying more value than it earned. A courier arrived from the 5th mill before Merrick could answer. The message bore no official seal. Only a miller's flour mark and 3 household witness cuts. Treasury soldiers had reached them first. They had locked the doors, seized the receiving scale, and removed the ration ledger. At the bottom, one line had been written in hurried charcoal. War Treasurer's order. Surrender local measure or receive no winter grain. Lucen looked up. When was this sent? Before dawn, the courier said. Before the riders left Frostmere. Before Merrick claimed the seizures could not be reversed. Adra understood the list at last. Merrick had not merely prepared to seize 17 mills. He had already begun. Frostmere had not interrupted his plan. It had made him accelerate it. Merrick had accelerated the seizures because daylight measure was more dangerous to him than hunger. Before noon, 3 new messages reached Frostmere. At the 7th mill, treasury soldiers had chained the receiving scale. At the 9th, household ledgers were taken as evidence of private distribution. At the 12th, all winter grain had been withheld until the miller accepted a crown-appointed steward. The same order followed each report. Surrender local measure or receive no royal grain. Merrick stood beside the flour table while Adra read the messages aloud. This is continuity enforcement, he said. A kingdom cannot survive if 17 mills invent separate laws. They are not inventing law, Adra replied. They are weighing sacks. They are refusing treasury authority. They are refusing to be accused before the grain arrives. Lucen looked toward the public board where Frostmere's promised and received measures now stood in separate columns. What happens if the mills continue refusing? Merrick answered without hesitation. The northern warehouses suspend release. Outside, the mill wheel continued turning. Inside, the room became colder. Merrick had built a system in which obedience opened the granary and questions closed it. Lucen's hand settled near the royal seal at his belt. You would starve 17 villages to preserve your chain? I would prevent 17 villages from tearing winter supply into private claims. Adra folded the messages. The grain was private before the treasury renamed it. Every measure already belonged to a household. Households do not defend kingdoms. They bury the people who do. Merrick's wolf flashed behind his eyes. Your grief has made you incapable of seeing beyond Frostmere. My grief did not cut Tavian's receipt mark. It did not sign your spear order, and it did not send soldiers to 12 mills before this investigation began. Lucen turned to the quartermaster. Search every treasury wagon. Merrick stepped forward. Those wagons contain protected winter records. Then they will remain protected while I read them. The first 2 wagons carried grain tallies and seal boxes. The third was marked empty for return to the capital. Adra watched its rear axle as soldiers pulled the canvas aside. The wagon sat too low. Empty wood does not bend iron that far. Merrick's expression changed. Only slightly. Enough. Lucen ordered the floorboards lifted. Beneath them lay a black iron chest wrapped in felt to prevent movement. The lock bore Merrick's private chain. He did not offer the key. Lucen broke the clasp with the edge of his royal seal. Inside rested the missing private chain register. No magic opened it. No stone projected its contents across the walls. Adra turned the pages herself. Each order carried a date, a destination, and the exact authority Merrick had claimed was too dispersed to trace. Frostmere. Recover undeclared reserves. Close local liability before civilian assembly. Transfer grain under victory necessity. Then, The other mills. Prepare accusation of hoarding. Remove household ledgers. Replace local keeper. Suspend winter release if public witnessing is demanded. The seizures had not responded to famine. They had been designed to make resistance look like its cause. Lucen found Tavian's name. The entry contained no command to kill him. Merrick had been more careful than that. If Bellmont obstructs recovery, complete removal before witnesses gather. If injury or death interrupts transfer, classify under Crown property liability. Proceed without delay. Lucen read the lines once. Then again, you expected death. I expected resistance, and prepared to use either injury or death to protect the recovery. I prepared the treasury to continue feeding the army. The siege had ended. The alliances had not. Merrick finally stopped pretending the choice had been accidental. Red Hollow gave you a crown no rival pack challenged. Victory feasts secured houses that would have abandoned you. Medals gave soldiers proof their sacrifice mattered. Roads remained open because powerful men believed the crown rewarded loyalty. Adra looked at him, and Frostmere paid for that belief in flour. One village paid a share. 17 mills were next. 17 mills were necessary. The honesty in his answer was colder than confession. Merrick did not believe he had stolen grain. He believed hunger belonged to the crown whenever power required it. Lucen closed the register. All seizure orders are revoked. Medic's gaze sharpened. You cannot revoke releases controlled by Treasury chain. I revoke the chain. If you remove me tonight, the northern warehouses remain sealed until a successor is recognized. Then I will name one. You do not know the routes, the reserve codes, or the border obligations. Lucen did not deny it. His ignorance had been the room Merrick governed from. Adra placed one hand on the 17-mill board. Do not replace one closed office with another. Lucen looked at her. What do you propose? Each mill sends one household witness and one working miller. Grain routes remain visible. No reserve is called surplus until every registered household receives winter measure. Merrick gave a quiet, disbelieving breath. A cooperative of hungry villagers cannot administer royal supply. No, Adra said. But they know when wagons do not arrive. Lucen faced the soldiers. War Treasurer Merrick Dane is suspended from winter authority. His register and seals remain under royal guard. Merrick did not resist when the chain was removed from his neck. He only looked toward the northern road. You believe finding the register gives you the grain. Adra followed his gaze. A red treasury signal rose beyond the hills. Then another. Warehouse closure. Emergency transfer. The register's final page contained the order Merrick had issued before entering Frostmere. If local seizure authority is challenged, move all northern winter reserves to the Crown Victory Granary before household claims can attach. The grain taken from 17 villages was already leaving the north. Merrick had lost his chain. His wagons were still carrying winter away. The wagons had left the warehouses, but the northern roads still belonged to the mills. Adra spread Merrick's transfer routes across the flour table. The Crown Victory Granary stood 2 days south. The grain convoys would avoid village roads, cross the frozen mire bridge, and join the military highway before nightfall. They will not pass every mill, Lucen said. They do not need to. Adra marked 4 crossings with Tavian's flour gauge. They must pass water narrow enough for winter bridges. Millers know every one. She sent riders carrying no royal command. Each message contained 3 things: the number of wagons, the weight stolen from the northern allotment, a request for public witness. Lucen prepared his royal guard. Adra stopped him before he mounted. If you arrive first with soldiers, Merrick's officers will call this a crown dispute. It is a crown dispute. It is a hunger dispute. Let the families arrive before the armor. Lucen looked toward the 32 Frostmere households waiting inside the mill yard. He had spent years believing authority moved fastest when it moved alone. Send the village riders first, he ordered. By dusk, the northern mills answered. Not with banners. With scales? At Mire Bridge, working millers rolled their weighing frames across the road. Wagon drivers parked empty household carts behind them. Widows brought ration ledgers. Shepherds carried the names of families too weak to travel. No one drew a weapon. They simply made the grain unable to pass unseen. The convoy arrived beneath red treasury signals. 42 wagons. Each bore the Crown Victory Granary seal. The escort captain raised Merrick's final transfer order. Clear the bridge. These reserves are under emergency crown protection. Adra stood before the first scale. Then weigh them under Crown protection. The order permits no local delay. The order was issued by a suspended treasurer. It was lawful when released. Lucen rode forward only after the mill witnesses had assembled. His black cloak carried no red hollow metals. The transfer is revoked. The captain held the parchment higher. War Treasury continuity law states that active winter movement cannot be interrupted until grain reaches secured storage. Adra looked at the wagons. Secured from whom? The captain did not answer. She took the first household ledger from a miller beside her. This grain already has claimants. Local claims do not attach until Treasury release. That is the lie Merrick built the seizures upon. Lucen dismounted. Open the first wagon. The captain remained still. Lucen removed the royal seal from his belt and pressed it into the snow between them. I will not command you to choose between two hidden orders. We will read the weight publicly. The wagon was opened. Its grain seal listed 100 measures. The scale received 83. The missing 17 had been entered as transport loss before the convoy left the warehouse. Adra recorded the difference. Then the second wagon, 91 measures. The third contained grain mixed with husks. The fourth carried sacks marked for a mill whose household ledger had already been confiscated. One by one, the convoy stopped being a royal reserve and became a list of named absences. Merrick's officers did not surrender because they were ashamed. They surrendered because every scale, household mark, and wagon number now had witnesses from 17 mills. No single ledger could rename the grain again. Lucen ordered the wagons turn north. This time the escort obeyed because the road itself had become an account. The treasury could not close. The grain returned over 3 days. Frostmere received what remained of its stolen allotment first, not because Adra asked for privilege, but because its families had already waited longest beneath the seizure seal. Other mills received according to household need verified openly. No village was declared complete until its own witnesses signed the weight. The hunger did not end in one morning. Some stores were too damaged. Some wagons had already vanished south. Some families had buried people before the grain returned. Adra refused to let the recovery be called restoration. Restoration suggests nothing was lost, she told the assembled pack leaders. Write what cannot be returned. So the new winter ledger contained 2 columns. Grain restored. Lives and seasons unrecoverable. Merrick Dane was tried before representatives from every affected mill. He did not confess to murder. He maintained that Tavian's resistance had endangered campaign supply and that his procedures had preserved royal stability. The evidence answered without needing his remorse. His private chain register proved pre-written seizures. The spear replacement order proved weapon evidence had been destroyed. Oren's dispatch proved liability closure had been prepared before the guards entered Frostmere. The hidden bin marks proved Tavian died protecting grain already measured to households. Merrick was stripped of office, property gained through war contracts, and all authority over winter supply. Deputy Marr's surviving estate records and the missing guard files were opened for further judgment. Tavian Bellmont's death record was corrected publicly. Killed while resisting unlawful removal of household grain, Adra did not thank the crown for writing 6 years late what she had known beside his body. Lucen read the correction himself. Then he faced the gathered villages. I wore victories purchased through shortages. I never examined. Ignorance did not keep my armor clean. It only kept the cost out of my sight. He removed the remaining war medals from the royal treasury display. Other officers followed more slowly. The Moon Millstones did not awaken for every medal. They were not instruments of shame. Each decoration was first traced through silver accounts, grain transfers, and household losses. Only metals proven to contain value taken from civilian rations were surrendered to the mill. The stones remembered measure. Silver entered. Ration weight returned. Not food. Standard. The metal was recast into public measuring weights marked with the names of the mills that had paid for victory. From that winter forward, every royal grain scale carried one. A war medal is only silver until the hungry learn what was melted into it. Frostmere Mill did not return to Adra as private property. She refused that ending. The mill became a cooperative held by the families whose grain had passed through its stones. Each household received a vote. Working millers controlled the machinery. Public witnesses controlled the ledgers. The crown could purchase flour. It could not seize measure. Lucen signed the charter beneath Tavian's old receiving board. Months later, he returned without soldiers. Adra sat at the long mill table while village representatives reviewed spring seed portions. A loaf rested near her hand. Lucen waited by the door. "You may enter," she said. He took the empty chair farthest from her. No bowl had been set for him. He did not ask for one. "I came to report that the 17th mill has reopened under household oversight." Adra continued cutting seed tallies. "That is work completed, not debt repaid. I know." He looked toward the covered bread. Once, as a wounded prince, he had watched her give away the final portion. As king, he had remembered and still taken her mill. Memory had not made him just. Only action repeated without reward might someday make him trustworthy. Lucen placed a small iron object on the table. Not a medal. A public ration weight cast from its silver. Frostmere's crescent wheel marked one side. Tavian Belmont's household measure marked the other. Adra examined it, then pushed it toward the center where everyone could use it. Lucen did not reach for her hand. He did not ask whether she could forgive him. He remained at the table without eating until the village accounts were complete. Only then did Adra cut the loaf. She gave bread first to the oldest widow, then to the mill apprentices, then to the tired wagon driver beside the stove. One portion remained. Adra placed it before Lucen, not as absolution, as a measure of what he might become if he never again confused possession with care. He accepted it with both hands. Outside, Frostmere's wheel turned beneath the thawing moon. Inside, every share was named before anyone ate.